Welcome, everyone, to this special interview edition of Monday Match Analysis. It's been too long. It's been since after Wimbledon, but we welcome, joining me by the phone, Steve Flink, the author of The Greatest Tennis Matches of All Time and an inductee into the Tennis Hall of Fame. Steve, the week after majors are not the same without this discussion, so I'm very happy to welcome you back to the program.
Well, Gill, it's always fun. I always enjoy talking tennis with you, and now we can look back at Roland Garros.
That's right. I appreciate that. So, it's funny. I did a show yesterday kind of recapping Roland Garros and mostly talking about the final, but I found that I wound up talking more about Dominic Thiem than I did the champion, Rafa Nadal. And it got me thinking.
And why was that?
Well, it's like, Nadal he's won so many. He's been so dominant. He's made it look so easy the last two years. It's like you end these tournaments and Nadal is the given, and all of the sort of interesting variables and the mysteries, it's everywhere but Nadal. So I guess the question I'm asking is, when you look back on, let's say, for example, the 2018 French Open, what will you remember it for?
Oh, no, I have to say, I will respectfully disagree with you on this, or have a different perception, let's say.
Yeah.
Because I look back on it as, another example of this man's greatness, in the sense that Nadal, as you know, had a very tough time after playing pretty healthy schedule deep into last year. But then after he went to Beijing and Shanghai, he was not able to finish a tournament all the way through the spring this year. He had to pull out in the quarters of Australia, down a break in the fifth against Chilich, and he was out of Acapulco, and this went on and on. He had to pull out of Indian Wells and Miami, and finally he got his season going at the in Monte Carlo in the clay court campaign,
right,
and had his usual dominant season, one loss on the clay, comes into Roland Garros. Didn't feel like he was at his best from beginning to end quite the way he was last year, but I thought it was a magnificent win for him, because he still had to come through in the end to beat Thiem, who was one of the three best clay court players in the world. And given what the background of Nadal's year, tail end of last year, beginning of this year, I thought it was a remarkable accomplishment for him to win his 11th.
I do agree with that. I mean, Nadal, you can just never count him out. No matter where he is, he almost always seems to get it together for this clay court season, and this year was no exception. He was so dominant for such a long time in the beginning of this clay court season, and then even when he cooled off, he was still able to win, all the matches that he should have won, with the exception of that team match in Madrid.
Well, that's always, that was a good thing for him. As you probably recall, a year ago, it was quite similar. He only had one loss on the clay. That was also to Thiem. Last year it was in Rome. This year it was in Madrid. And each time he was able to avenge those losses at Roland Garros with much more riding on the outcome of the match and best-of-5 set format rather than best-of-3. But I think it's actually good for him to be in a situation like that, where he respects the opponent that much and feels like he's got to be pretty close to his peak, which is what he said after his semifinal win over Del Potro, that he knew he needed to be at his best for the final, and he was. So I guess watching him not taking it for granted made me not take it for granted. And you saw him crying at the presentation ceremony. One stage, the tears were flowing a little bit, and that's all because it just hit him, everything that he had been through in the last several months leading up to the clay court circuit, and then there he was standing there once more as the champion of the most prestigious clay court tournament in the world. So I think it was pretty poignant to watch him in that emotional state.
I thought Thiem was going to take it 5, so I certainly was just as kind of, I didn't take that for granted either in that respect, and I want to get to that match in a second. But first, while we're talking big picture, I get two comments, Steve. I get some people saying, I want Nadal to be dominant at the French Open for 10 more years. I love it. I eat it up. And then I get another choir of people who say, oh my God, this is so boring. I know who's going to win. I can't wait for grass court season. So I guess my question is, Nadal's dominance on clay, and it's hard because it's never a given that a guy's gonna win, French Opens, and we've never seen a guy this dominant. But what does it mean for tennis? In terms of
what does it mean for tennis? You mean is it a positive or a negative?
Right.
Yeah, I definitely lean toward the former because I think that it will go down as one of the most remarkable achievements in all of sports for a player to dominate an event in this fashion. Now, granted, Federer, of course, is going to be going for number 9 at Wimbledon, which is pretty extraordinary as well. But he at least has lost, 3 finals at Wimbledon, 2 to Djokovic and 1 to Nadal. I mean, he's had some tough moments in very big matches there and been human. But Nadal has never lost a final in Roland Garros. He lost once in '09 to Soderling in the round of 16, and then he lost in the quarters to Djokovic the other time. Those were 2009 and 2015. But when he's been able to get past the quarters and into the semis, he never loses.
Yeah.
And you've got to remember that 4 of those finals against Federer, a couple of finals against Djokovic, he's beaten some formidable adversaries in those final round clashes. So I think it's a positive in the sense that for one man to win that many at a major and to do it without losing a final, it just makes it doubly impressive.
I almost feel like there's a sweet spot. So I think that what the women's side of things has to deal with often without Serena, especially in recent years, I think that that's probably like the worst case scenario. You want to have legends, you want to have stars, you want to have greatness. But I think that sweet spot is when you have a few great players at the top and you're not really sure which one of those are going to win. And we've been...
Yeah, I think you're right about that. That's a very fair point.
So
and I think that we're getting that now in a sense because look what happened, how the women have started this year. Wozniacki had never won a major. She'd ended 2 years at number 1 without winning a major. And yet finally now, at the beginning of 18, she pulled it off, and she's got that monkey off her back. And now Halep follows. Halep, who lost the heartbreaker to Wozniacki in Australia, finally gets hers after losing 3 major finals. So I think that's good. I agree, though. Then it would be nice to see maybe one of them again win at Wimbledon and see a struggle for supremacy among maybe 3 or 4 women,
right,
instead of just alternating different majors, 6 or 7 in a row, having different women champions at that I don't think is good. I like your philosophy. Let's have 3, let's say, vying for the top.
Right. So Dominic Thiem has been basically, I think he's kind of cemented himself as the next guy up, or the next guy down, I should really say, after Rafa Nadal, beating him 3 times on clay in his career. But at the same time, in the same breath, he's never been competitive at Roland Garros when he's played Nadal. So do you feel like this is a situation where Thiem almost just needs to wait for Nadal to either leave the game or have a steep decline in level? Or do you have faith in Thiem in the next few years? And I don't know if that means next year or 3 years or so on. But do you feel like Thiem can eventually close that gap? Or do you think it's going to be a matter of Nadal kind of coming down to Thiem's level?
Well, it may be a combination, Gill, and I think I think he has steadily improved. I look at the team of 2016 who lost to Djokovic in the semis. So they had to play that over in the Lenglan court, and he was demolished by a top-of-the-line Djokovic, who then went on to win the title over Andy Murray, of course, to fill out his resume and record a career Grand Slam. Then last year, Nadal crushed him after having lost to him in Rome. And I feel like each year, though, he's gotten just a little bit better. And that was the case again this year. Good clay court season, and caps it off by getting to the finals here. So I think he will keep getting better. And we don't know exactly what Nadal's going to look like at 33 or 34, but I would think maybe by 34 he's declining somewhat. So I think it'll be the 2 factors. I don't think it'll be an impossibility that maybe by 2 years from now he might be able to pull off a win over Nadal. Might. But we're looking at such a gigantic clay court force here, such a unique individual. It's hard to tell. That's not to say that maybe Nadal doesn't have that day against somebody else, and where things just don't go right, or he's hurt, or whatever the problem is, and in which case Thiem could step in and win the title then as well. So I do have faith in him. To get to the crux of your question, I do believe he will inevitably win at least 1 French before his career concludes, and possibly 2 or 3.
If you were in the film room with Dominic Thiem going over that Nadal final that we just witnessed, what are some of the things you think, not that you're his coach, but let's just put on that hat for a second. What do you think are some of the things you'd say, well, maybe a year from now we can be better at this and we can be better at this?
Well, I think here's what I think it came down to, Gill. I just think that high ball on the back end, which of course Nadal employs, that uses that heavy topspin, particularly off his vicious forehand, of course, the whirlwind topspin that bounds up so high. And you saw a team trying to come to terms with that the entire match. Move in, take it extra early, try to go with a slice here and there. He did everything in his power to try to combat that tactic, basically to no avail. And I would say maybe he could have sliced a few more of those, but even that's dangerous because Nadal handles, for a player with a Western grip, he handles that low ball off the forehand as well as anybody I've ever seen. And so even that is probably not going to work. No, I think all that they would want to say to him is they might look, and he might look at the 4-5 game in the first set. He had broken back in the first set to get to 2-all after Nadal had a brilliant start to get to 2-love. And then they were on serve all the way through the rest of the set and teams fighting break points out. But suddenly at 4-5, he really wilted. Played one of his worst games of the match. And Nadal was alert and opportunistic, and he got the break at love. I mean, I think they might want to have him look at that and say, now surely you can get out there in a game that important and not give that much away. Make him earn it more. But aside from that, I wouldn't be too critical because I just think Nadal was peaking by that stage of the tournament, and Thiem just has to keep doing what he's doing. He's a workhorse. He'll get there one day.
I agree. I love his game. My thing is the court position, which I think it hurts him on other surfaces, doesn't hurt him as much on clay until he plays Nadal, and then it kind of comes back to hurt him a lot more because Nadal is so good at kind of staying on top of you and pressuring you.
Fair point, but I would just say that the trouble with that is with that topspin bounding up so high, it's so difficult to move in, and he did at times try to do that, and he'd almost hit a half two-hander. He'd move his other hand up there to try to get a little more strength on the high ball, and nothing worked. I just think that it's so hard for him. Two-handers can do that. Djokovic can step into the court. Djokovic, to me, at top of the line, Djokovic is always going to be the toughest opponent for Rafa on clay, always. And he can do it with his two-hander. But I think the problem is to have the court position that you might want, which I understand. He's going to be hitting backhands almost like half volleys off high bounding balls, and that's not easy to do.
I agree. Djokovic's two-hander, he's able to, when Nadal drops it short, he's really able to just kind of step in, take the ball on the rise if need be, and hit that backhand off of Nadal's kicking forehand better than anyone.
His two-hander, when he's right, his two-hander is the best in the game. So, absolutely, he steps in, he takes it early. There's no problem. It's with his two-hander when he's at his best. Obviously, there are other times when Rafa has been able to really get his measure on clay when Novak's been just a little bit off. But the best Djokovic has played some terrific clay court matches against Nadal. One of the most memorable was their semifinal 5 years ago that went to 9-7 in the fifth after Djokovic was actually serving up a break 4-3 in the fifth. So he's a great clay court player, and frankly, I think he could well have been in the final, Gill, this time because he let that quarterfinal get away and against Cecchinato, and he should have won that match. He should have never been down 2 sets. If he'd won that, he plays Thiem, and I think it was at least 50-50 for Novak to win that match if he gets there, in which case we would have seen him and Nadal in the final again. In a way, I'm sorry we didn't get it.
Yeah, me as well. I actually think, and I opened up this interview talking about, what are you going to remember from this French Open? I thought, if anything, the most interesting thing to watch in this French Open was Novak Djokovic's return and how he would do that. That really, more than anything, intrigued me and interested me, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. You had a lot of faith in Djokovic going into the tournament. Why was that?
Oh, absolutely I did. And frankly, I still have a lot of faith. Well, because I was very impressed with what he did in Rome. He had a very impressive performance against Nishikori, and got to the semis and played quite well against Nadal. And I thought he was much closer to the top of his game. I thought he found pretty good form over the course of the fortnight in Roland Garros as well. But then, as I said, he let that quarterfinal get away. Never should have been down 2 sets. He had 3 set points in the second set, didn't convert, then blazed through the third set 6-1 and had 5-2 in the fourth. And let it get away eventually in the tiebreak. But I felt like his game is back. To me, he's really hitting the ball like the Novak of old. This is largely in his head now. It's the confidence to come through on the bigger points. But the service motion is smoothed out again. It looks like it's back in sync, and he's finding the corners, and he's got more velocity. And I think off the ground, overall, he's looking really good. I think it's a question of a mental turnaround. And he did say in his press comments after that really distressing loss that he made a comment about he might not play on the grass or he's not going to play on the grass, and I knew that he didn't mean it. And sure enough, he's entered the Queen's Club tournament in London next week. It's possible he and Nadal might meet there. But it's a sign to me that he still cares a lot. He was really despondent after losing, but it still means a lot to him. He was really close to being in the semifinals. So he's not that far off, Gill. And I think at Wimbledon we might see Djokovic be quite a threat.
Yeah, that comment was about skipping the grass tournament. Was that not out of just complete shock and despair with what had happened in that match that he just played?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely was. And it was also because he just felt like he didn't want to talk about anything. He came in and he actually asked to come into interview room 2. Interview room 2 is a much, much smaller room than the main one, and they would have preferred to have him in the main one. But he was so disconsolate that he just wanted to get in there and get it over with. So he was answering the questions almost robotically, and he wasn't trying to be rude, and he gave his opponent credit as he always does, but you could see that this one really, really stung. It's not a match he expected to lose. On the other hand, I think he's been able to reflect since then. He has a few days to think about it and realizes, okay, I still got to the quarters. It wasn't a disastrous tournament. I should have done better, but I'm going to go all out for Wimbledon. And I think, depending on his draw, as you know, he'll get seeded around number 20, so who knows where he's going to fall, but if his draw isn't horrendous, he could go a long way at Wimbledon.
My timetable all season with Djokovic, and even in the lowest of the lows, like that Indian Wells loss against Taro Daniel, I've always thought the U.S. Open is about right for him. So you're a little bit ahead of my timetable. To me, seeing Djokovic, it's almost like, Steve, like you and I talk all the time about, is it mental or physical? But I've never seen mental and physical so connected in a player, where I've seen matches where Djokovic, his mental affects the physical to the point where it almost seems like he's exhausted, yet he shouldn't be. And I just feel like the mental and physical.
Maybe so, but as you just alluded to, you take a match like a Taro Daniel, the way he was playing in Indian Wells in Miami, and he was not striking the ball well enough to possibly believe in himself, and he knew it.
Yeah.
Now he is. Now the stroke production and the accuracy and the timing, it's all pretty much there. And so I think I believe he's got to be kind of encouraged by that. Now your point about the Open is well taken because he's always been at his very best on hard courts. On the other hand, it's just almost criminal that we're looking at 2 titles for him there. Because he's just lost way too many finals. He should actually have 4 or 5 U.S. Open titles by now. But Wimbledon, he's won 3 times. And he won it in 14 and 15 back-to-back. He won it in 11 over Nadal. And I think he's underrated on the grass. I see, to me, the most impressive thing about Djokovic is he's almost equally good on all surfaces. Maybe he's slightly less effective on clay than the grass and hard, but I wouldn't put much of a difference there. And I just think it's a question, can he come around fast enough and get on a roll at Wimbledon and be a threat? But there's also no doubt by the end of summer, with a lot more matches on hard and hopefully some good performances in Canada and Cincinnati, that he could come into the Open at an absolute peak.
Yeah, and quickly, I don't want to overlook the guy who beat him, Marco Cecchinato. I know it's hard to say because we haven't seen that much of the guy, but do you see Cecchinato as a guy who will kind of emerge as someone we'll be seeing more often in late stages in the tournament, or do you think that this could be sort of a flash-in-the-pan situation?
A little bit more of the latter. I mean, not a total flash in the pan, but I would really be surprised if we ever saw him back in a semifinal at a major again. I think it was circumstantial. There were a lot of reasons for it happening. I give him a lot of credit, and he was certainly opportunistic, and he took advantage of his openings. But I wouldn't expect to see him go that far again. On the other hand, you have sort of a new lease on life when your ranking goes up as significantly as his did, and he's going to be getting into a lot more tournaments that wouldn't have been at his disposal before. So I think he can have a decent run, but I don't expect anything on this level ever again.
Right. So I want to transition to someone who also made the quarterfinals, kind of similar to Djokovic, I'd say, going into this tournament. Well, I guess it wasn't so similar in circumstance, because Sascha Zverev came into the French 0-7 against top 50 players, which was, in my opinion, the craziest stat in all of men's tennis. But finally, this run, this crazy, improbable run of Zverev falling, as such a talented player to top 50 players in majors, it came to an end. He made a quarterfinal, yet it looked so difficult. So what do you make? Each and every match went 5, except the first round. What did you make of Zverev's French Open run?
I thought it was very gritty, extremely gritty of him. I mean, 3 times he came from 2 sets to 1 down to win in 5 sets. And I think he obviously he was worn out. By the time he lost to Thiem in the quarters, there was no way he could do it. It was impossible, but it was admirable. I do agree with you. That stat is nuts, and it's partially just a case that he's put a lot of pressure on him. The majors are still really new to him. He's only been playing them for a couple of years, and by last year, though, he had high expectations, particularly for the U.S. Open, where he lost to Kroric. And I think I think we're going to be forgetting about that stat very soon. I think he's a real threat at Wimbledon. He's going to be a threat again at the U.S. Open. And I think it was important for him that even that was the hard way, that he actually got to a quarter at a major, and that he can start making that more of a habit and going beyond that. Because, frankly, I think if you look at the fact that Federer and Nadal are going to have to play somewhat reduced schedules this year, Roger has to pick his spots. He already missed a lot of it. Obviously, skipped the clay court season, and we'll see how much he plays in the fall. Rafa doesn't want a repeat of what happened last year going into this year, where he's not able to finish tournaments. And that was partially because he played so much through the summer into the fall and back-to-back tournaments in China, and it kind of ruined him physically. So I think they're going to be careful. I'm not sure either one of them is going to go all out to make sure they're number one. And that leaves a real opening for Sascha Zverev, who right now is number 2 in the ATP points with the race to London, number 2 behind Nadal, and 300-400 points ahead of Federer. And I think he's going to be right in the thick of it, and he can play more at his age. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he ended the year number 1.
That's a very interesting point. Zverev, what really impressed me about this clay court season is how he was able to hold up physically. He had his home tournament in Munich.
You're so right.
You're
so right, because he won the back-to-back tournaments, and you just wondered how well he was going to hold up the whole way through, and then was it going to kill his Roland Garros? And it really didn't. Obviously, even if he hadn't played that much leading up to Roland Garros, he would have been in trouble with the 3-5 setters. But it was very impressive, and a sign that he's physically tougher and more durable than he was a year ago, and that's another reason why I think number 1 is possible. But of course, it's going to partially be contingent on he's got to make some better showings of the majors. The quarters was a start, but he needs, say, at least a final out of these last 2 at Wimbledon, the Open, if he's going to make that move to number 1. But somehow I think he just might do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I thought he was the second most impressive player after Nadal, leading up to Roland Garros. Before the clay court season, I thought the second most impressive player in the world was Juan Martín del Potro. His backhand was back to a level that we haven't seen it since the wrist surgery, and it was very exciting to see del Potro play at the level that he was at headed into the clay court season. Do you feel like del Potro is back to contendership, back to pre-injury del Potro?
Pretty close. I mean, listen, he got to that was a nice run to the semis. Whatever remote chance he had to beat Nadal on clay, and it was remote, was destroyed by the fact that he had to play 3 sets, finish off 3 sets against Cilic the day before. Now, Rafa had to play 2, barely over 2 sets, to finish off his match against Schwartzman, which was his toughest, but those were 6-2, 6-2 sets. Cilic had quite a lot of work to do, and Delpo did. Delpo having to beat Cilic. Yeah. And go through 3 hard sets to do it meant that he was pretty ruined physically. On the other hand, it was a semifinal, and he's number 4 in the world. You're right about the early part of the year, where of course he had beaten Federer to win Indian Wells, and I think I definitely think we're going to see him be very dangerous at both Wimbledon and the Open, and I hope he can hold up physically. I mean, obviously the Nadal matchup is the toughest physical matchup in tennis for just about anybody, but Delpo on those quicker courts. I mean, you saw it last year. You saw it at the Open. You know, he beat Federer and lost to Nadal in the semis. He's going to be right in the latter stages of these majors, and he just might be able to pull another one off.
Yeah, and I'm so glad about that, because it would have been severely unfortunate if the wrists really prevented him from reaching where we knew he could reach after winning that 2009 U.S. Open. So before I move on from the French, and it has to be a record, Steve, to have not mentioned Roger Federer for 26 minutes in. It has to be a record, but we're not going to do it yet. I sort of just did. But first, Serena coming from having her child, coming to the French Open, she probably knew that she wasn't really going to be contending for a title, but for me, the way Serena played, she left no doubt that there will be more major titles in Serena's future.
Well, I agree with you on that. I totally agree. My only concern is that she had this pectoral muscular thing that obviously prevented her from. She had to pull out and not play Sharapova. But you're right. She played 3 very good matches, looked better to me in each round, and knocked off a couple of seeds. She was impressive. And the question now is, can she stay healthy? I don't think she's going to be ready, Gill, to win Wimbledon, because her preparation will have been cut down substantially here. But I do think she'll play some good matches there and maybe get to the quarters or semis. And then U.S. Open time, watch out. If she's played 2 or 3 good hardcourt tournaments, goes deep into a couple of hardcourt tournaments over the summer, I think she'd have a really good chance to win the U.S. Open. So I agree with you. I mean, I thought her form was remarkable in Roland Garros with no clay court preparation, and only having played a few matches there with Indian Wells and Miami, I guess 4 matches total. I mean, she really looked good in Roland Garros.
Yeah.
So she can console herself with that, and I think you're going to see some great tennis from her at the end of the summer in New York.
Yeah, unbelievable. Okay, so let's finally get to Roger Federer. He will return in Stuttgart this week, but right now dominating the headlines is Federer to Uniqlo. Is he leaving Nike? Do you have any leads on that?
Well, everybody in Paris certainly believed it to be true, and I think it's one of these cases again, I guess, where you wonder whether Nike, do they want to do it 10 years when it's a guy who's about to turn 37? You would think with Federer, you would never want to let him go. That it just would be, you just wouldn't do it. But from every report I heard and what every reporter was telling me who had delved into it a little bit in Paris, I think it is true. And obviously he'll clarify everything while he's in Germany, but I think it's going to happen, and I would think Nike would be not terribly happy about the situation, but it looks like Federer maybe has found what for him is a better deal.
That is going to be weird to look at, to say the least, right?
Oh, it is, but you know his taste, and you can be certain that it'll be classy, elegant-looking clothing.
For sure.
He's not going to go out there looking. He wouldn't settle for clothing that was, beneath him stylistically. I think you can count on that. So, and maybe there'll be some faint similarity to Nike, but it'll be something that's flattering and that looks good. And he has good taste that way, and I'm certain that he'll still look the way we expect Federer to look on a tennis court.
He also left it open to possibility. I don't know who he was interviewing with, but supposedly he said that he would love to play Nadal one more time at Roland Garros. But do you think that we'll ever see him play clay court tennis again? This seems to be, at least last year, it seemed to be the right decision by a landslide. So I don't know why he would change anything. What do you think will happen?
It's hard to imagine in the near future. He talks about it a little bit down the road.
Yeah.
But, of course, then the problem then is how can he really expect then, depending on where they're ranked? I mean, I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, because there's no guarantees that they meet there. And, Is he expecting that at that time he's going to be 8 in the world and Rafa's going to be? I'm not sure what the thinking is. I think it's a nice thought, but it's not going to happen. And I think he's going to find himself always wanting to stay with this formula because it gives him a little time off, it protects him, and it may allow him to play this game at top level up to 40, which is phenomenal. But if he starts messing around and going on the clay and risking injuries, I just don't think it's worth the risk.
I know it's tough. You and me both. We like to see players' forms before we make predictions. But is he your early favorite to win Wimbledon?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's only a handful of guys that can beat him there. And I mean, Zverev at the tail end of the tournament, either in a semi or a final, yes, I think on a particularly good day he can do it. I think Delpo can do it. But it's very few guys. It would have been Kyrgios if he was healthy. I don't think we're going to see Kyrgios in the field. John Isner, great serving day, gets him into tie breaks, but it's very few. And somehow his draws always seem to be excellent at Wimbledon, which only makes him tougher to beat. So I make him the clear favorite, and I give all those other guys, the likes of Delpo and Zverev, I give them a shot. And frankly, I do believe, Gill, that this year Nadal. You think about last year. He played 3, as he alluded to in Paris. He played 3 very good matches on his way to the round of 16. They put him on court 1, which was something of an insult, and he didn't understand it. And it's against Gill Muller, who is, of course, a tough left-handed, crafty, aggressive left-handed player, who ends up beating Rafa 15-13 in the 5th.
Yeah.
I think had he won that match, he would have gone to the finals last year. And I think he's long overdue because if you go back to the earlier years of his career, 2006 and 7 and 8, he's final, and then a win. He played Federer all 3 years. He won the last of those battles, and then he doesn't play in 09. Then he's in the finals. He wins it in 2010, and he's in the finals in 2011. So he had a long span there where he couldn't miss the finals. Hasn't been back to a final since, or even close. I think he's long overdue. And so I do expect a great Wimbledon from this year. And then who knows? Maybe we see Federer and Nadal in the finals 10 years after their epic.
Yeah, we were on the same page last year. I think we both thought – I remember we were like Muller was a terrible matchup for Nadal. Muller, excuse me. And and we both thought Nadal would have went to the final.
Absolutely. And I think he felt that. And I honestly think if that match had ever been played on center – Nadal wins it in 4 sets.
Yeah.
And but it was court 1, as you probably know. That's where a couple of years earlier, where Novak Djokovic nearly lost to Kevin Anderson when he went on to win the title for the second year in a row in 2015. It's where he lost to Sam Querrey the next year. It's kind of an upset-minded court. And I think it plays differently from center, and the atmosphere is different, and somehow the underdogs are more comfortable over there.
Right.
Inevitably they are. So I just think Nadal is, he really adapts his game well to grass. He showed it last year. He starts flattening out all of his ground strokes, shortens his backswing on the return, does what he has to do to succeed. And I think this year, with some luck, we're going to see him back in the latter stages and threatening to win this title again.
Yeah, Andy Murray will be back. And last time I mentioned him to someone, the person I was talking to literally forgot he existed is what he told me. I haven't forgot about Andy Murray. I kind of miss him. He will be back, but where should expectations be, in your opinion, for Murray?
Yeah, not very high. I think the problem is it's such a long time away, and he had that hip surgery at the beginning of the year. He had to pull out of the Australian. And he said at the time something that really worried me, which was that he felt like he could maybe be 95%, and that would be, Andy Murray at 95%. If that mobility is not 100%, that's 99% of his game. His speed was so critical to his success.
Yeah.
So I'm not optimistic with that amount of time away. Certainly not for Wimbledon. I hope over the course of the year, if he keeps playing, that he finds that he actually could get back to 100% of what he was. But anything less than that, and he's in real trouble in my view. And I say that with the greatest respect for Andy Murray, who has, of course, won 2 Wimbledons, a U.S. Open, and a couple of gold medals. So he's got a Hall of Fame career, and considering where he was prior to the 2012 season, he's done astounding things. But I'm not terribly optimistic right now about him getting back to the absolute upper levels of the game.
Yeah, maybe at best he can give the center court crowd at Wimbledon a couple wins, but hips also are. I'd say hips and knees are probably the two most concerning injuries for a tennis player, and maybe you throw elbows in there, but hips are tough.
Oh, you're right. Maybe throw elbows and maybe throw shoulders as well. But yeah, I agree with you. And his is a really tricky thing, and you just hope. I mean, look, it's just been a terrible last year. He kept trying to get going last year after he lost that painfully to Query on the center court where he could hardly move. And he came over trying to get ready for the Open, as you remember, and it just didn't work out. And I think that Andy, it's going to be a long, tough recovery, and it may not ever happen to the extent that he hopes it will. He's got to try, but I just don't have a good feeling about where he's going.
Yeah, well, we hope the best for Andy. I'm going to end on this, Stephen. This is I would classify this as a controversial topic. It has been in tennis really for over a decade. But Nadal made comments recently about pay between men and women, and basically his comments consisted of, or he suggested that players should get paid on viewership and not necessarily, just sort of the flat black and white equal pay that we have in tennis, at least in the majors. Now, mind you, just before I let you go on this, it's not always the case that men draw better ratings than women, especially when a Williams sister is involved in the final. We've seen finals where the women draw more viewers than the men. So I would just kind of go at this topic with this in mind. But what did you think of Nadal's topic? I was certainly surprised that he said it, if anything else.
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear it, but hearing it from you now, I'm very surprised because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I don't think it's something that politically can work, and I don't really fully understand it. And
okay.
As you say, there are times. I mean, look, that I would love to have seen the ratings for on Tennis Channel or anywhere else had Maria and Serena faced off in Roland Garros.
Would have been huge.
It would have been extraordinary. So I don't think Rafa's right on that. You know what? I agree with him on just about everything.
Yeah.
He's a smart, sensible thinker.
Yes.
I'd have to hear him elaborate on this one if I was going to really understand his point of view.
Yeah. Well, we won't go any deeper, especially because you haven't seen the quote. I'd actually like to read the quote in full. I've seen it more on Twitter and headlines and whatnot. But that is pretty much what he said. But anyway, Steve, is there anything that you feel like we've missed going? Unfortunately, keeping you a little late. I like to keep it to 30.
No,
but
I think we've had it. No, there's something. I'm more than happy to respond to anything you bring up, but I feel like we've covered a lot of great ground in this conference. It's been one of our more enjoyable conversations. No
doubt. For sure. They get better and better, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So I will talk to you very soon. Thank you again for coming on. And as long as I am in the studio here in New York, where I can do these interviews, we will continue to do them. And thanks so much again. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Gill, and I always look forward to it. And maybe we can reconvene after Wimbledon if it works out.
Yes, sir. Steve Flink, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks. All right. There you have it. That sounds awful. There you have it. Steve Flink said a bunch of interesting things. Will Zverev be number one? That was something that I hadn't thought about. And then giving, I'd say, as much credit to Nadal, or not as much credit, but as much love to Nadal as I'd say you can possibly give him, pointing out how much Rafa struggled, basically leading up to the clay court season. If you look at it in that lens, it sort of changes things. If you look at how Rafa really did need to fight back to get to this level that we saw him play at the clay court season, and that is certainly an interesting perspective. We do expect Federer to indeed switch to Uniqlo. That's a pretty big deal. I'd say that's a big deal. Zverev, we both agree, will be coming back, or not coming back, will be taking leaps and bounds forward. We're on the same page there. and with Djokovic. I think we're pretty close. Steve expects him to really contend at Wimbledon. I expect him to contend, but I don't expect the old Novak Djokovic to really be back in full force until the U.S. Open. And also Serena Williams, you can do nothing but marvel at how good she looked at the French Open, considering the lack of tournament play she's had and how quickly she's had to basically rebound and get back in shape after her pregnancy. So that'll do it for us here. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.